so things have slowed down just a little bit in the shop here, and there's quite a few videos that I've meant to do that I'm not able to do if I don't have the time to. So this gives me a little bit of an opportunity to put out some of these other videos, one of them being a shop tour. And so that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to give you guys a tour of the shop and all my tools and equipment. I don't typically like people knowing everything that I have, but we don't dial 911 at our house, so I'm not super worried about it. All right, so to start out, we can talk about the building itself. This building is a 40 by 60. I've obviously got 2 bays that I use for pulling vehicles and equipment in. When I first decided I wanted to build a shop, I sketched out the floor plan on a little piece of notepad paper, and I actually still have the notepad paper, and it just kind of escalated from there. I still have a piece of notepad paper from when I came up with my business logo as well. It's kind of cool to look back and see where an idea or a thought evolved into this. So the building itself is basically exactly what I wanted when I sketched it out on the pad. I've got my man door here. I did want one window for natural light, even though it's covered up, and that's also because I don't like people knowing what I have, but sometimes it's just kind of nice to have some natural light. The doors that I have, they are 14 by 14 foot doors. For you guys that are thinking about building some sort of a steel building or shop, if you plan on pulling camp trailers in, any sort of fifth wheel, you want to get a 14-foot door because that's the minimum size door you can have where the air conditioner will fit underneath so that you can pull it in. Semi-trailers as well, believe it or not, I've had semi-trailers in here that I've worked on. I did opt for the insulated doors. Obviously, I've insulated my shop, and I actually upgraded the insulation as well. Here in Utah, it gets pretty cold. Last night it was single digits. I'm one that doesn't really like to be cold. I think standard insulation for steel buildings is like 4-inch, and I went with 6-inch. I'm trying to remember what the R value is. I went with 6-inch thick insulation, and I haven't regretted it because after about 30 minutes, if I've got both heaters running and the fans on, it'll push the air around enough that it starts getting the temperature up around 55, 60 degrees. That's about right where I like it when I'm working. So I haven't regretted the insulation upgrade. Let's go back to the doors. I did opt for the more expensive lifters for the doors. These are Wayne Dalton lifters, and you can see that they are off to the side. There's 2 kinds. There's the kind that you suspend from the ceiling in the center, and they pull from the center. These ones pull from the side. And I'm not really a garage door guy, but I've got a buddy who is, and he's the one that installed them, and he's the one that got them for me, and he just told me in an industrial setting, they're just better. And when you're using these big of doors that are insulated, they're heavy. And so these types of lifters hold up better to lifting that much weight on a day-to-day basis. So I did end up going with those lifters. I had to weld in plates. So that plate, and I put a plate in there because I wasn't sure which side the lifters were going in, and I wanted to have it all ready for my buddy that put the doors in. And it's not like I can't mount something right there anyway, so I did it on both sides. I did put both lifters here, which made it nice when I was wiring the outlets for them. I have been very happy with the doors. They actually do keep most of the heat in. I did 95% of the work on this shop. I don't have the money to pay someone else to do the work, and I knew that if I was going to build a shop this size, I was going to have to do most of the work myself. And it took me a total of probably, I started building the shop in 2016, and I don't think it was complete. The main structure, insulation, electrical, lights, heating, the main body of the shop, I don't think it was complete until 2018. So it took me a good 1.5 to 2 years to complete, but that was doing all the work myself. I did have some help from some buddies on the concrete. I also had help from my wife on the tin and insulation. My dad helped me a little bit, and obviously my kids were out here handing me stuff and helping me where they could. So it was definitely nice to have help where I did have help. But this goes to show that if you are wanting to do something like this, and you're not afraid of work, and you're not afraid of trying something new, you can do it. It's not rocket science. This is stuff that anyone is capable of doing. When you order the steel building, they give you an engineered set of plans, and so you can basically just follow the plans, and they'll tell you everything you need to do to install it, what order, and all that stuff. Obviously, having a little bit of construction background is going to help you, so keep that in mind as well. Just some more information on the actual structure of the building, the main structure. If you look here, my columns, these are the columns, these outside beams. My columns are straight I-beams. And I'm sure a lot of you guys that have been in and out of some steel buildings in your life, you've noticed that a lot of steel buildings will have a tapered column. I didn't want those because I knew I was going to have to utilize the space the best I could, for one. That's the first reason. And so I didn't want those tapers getting in the way. You're not able to walk past the wall real close because the taper's there. And the other reason is I knew that I was going to build some jib cranes, and I knew that I wanted to mount them to the existing columns for structural integrity. So that was the other reason that I opted to go with straight columns. Obviously that's a change order, and they charge you more money for it, so you'll want to think about that too if you're looking to go that route. The structure itself is all bolted together. There really wasn't any welding that had to be done on the structure. It comes in a kit. If you've got an impact gun and some spud wrenches and some stuff like that, just some basic ironworker tools, you can put up one of these buildings no problem. As far as the concrete goes, the concrete is 6 inches thick. It took me about 70 yards to pour this concrete. I did a monolithic pour. For those of you who don't know what a monolithic pour is, it's when you pour the footings and the foundation all in one. As the video goes on, I'm going to show you guys some pictures because I took picture documentation of the whole process. So I'll be able to show you guys from start to finish when I dug the footings, when I compacted, when I put the rebar in, all of it. So there was a lot that had to go on for me to get this prepped and ready to go for the actual steel building. So keep that in mind as well. There's a lot of work that has to happen before the building ever starts getting put up, and that starts with the floor. Now in this video, I'm gonna shoot straight with you guys. I'm just gonna be honest with you guys about everything. I'm gonna share the good, the bad, the ugly, the things I don't like about the job I did, the things I do like about the job I did. Then there are things that I don't like about what I did. And you know, this was a learning experience for me. I had never put up one of these steel buildings before. A lot was learned from it. So hopefully some of you guys that are thinking about putting up something like this, you guys can learn from my mistakes. So as far as the floor goes, obviously the pad is 40 by 60, 70 yards of concrete. I did a monolithic pour, and my yard was such that, I'll show you guys. Okay, so if you look, I still need to tear my garden out, but if you look, my yard has a taper to it. So this far corner right here, you can see that that's to grade. So that corner was actually on grade. If you walk down to this corner, I don't know if you guys can see that in the video, but I have had to build this up. I had to build this end up with fill. One of the things that I'm not happy with is the concrete. And I've done a lot of concrete in my life. I had a friend that we did side jobs together where we would go finish concrete. I'm a little ashamed of this one just because I know better, and I should have done it better. And I don't think it's going to cause any structural issues. It just drives me nuts because there's cracks in the floor that I don't feel like would be there if I'd have done something different. So if you look at this, there is a constant crack around this whole building. And it basically goes about 8 feet out, and there's random cracks that shoot out towards the wall. But there is a crack that goes around this whole building about 6 to 8 feet out. And the reason that I believe it does that is because I didn't tie a solid rebar mat. The plans didn't call for it. The plans called for what's called hairpins, and there's a 24-inch by 24-inch footing around the whole outside of this building. Everywhere where there's a column, and this was not called for in the plans, this is something that I did because I knew I was going to be adding cranes, and I knew I needed a footing that could hold weight. So everywhere where there's a column, so on every column, I dug a 36 by 36 hole, and then I tied rebar, and I really beefed it up. And then I tied the outside footing, the 24-inch footing, to each column. So everything's tied together. Everything's good that way. But the plans called for what's called hairpins, and that's where you take a 20-foot length of rebar, you bend a 90 and you tie it in with the footing, and then you lay them out into the floor here. That's what my plans called for. I followed the plans, but I went back and forth on whether I should do a mat, and I thought, well, the plans don't really call for that, so I'll probably be okay. Well, that's what I did, and I believe that that's why it's cracked around the whole building. If I would have had a continuous mat, 24 inches on center with number 4 rebar or whatever, I don't think I would have ran into this issue where there's a crack around the whole thing. And I haven't seen any settling or movement. There's just a crack, and it bugs me because I'm anal. But you live and you learn. So if you guys are looking to do a fab shop with a still building, and if you're wanting to put any sort of crane in and move heavy equipment around the inside of your building, I would just spend the extra money, buy the rebar, tie the mat. It sucks to pour around the mat, and it makes it a little more complicated, but really it's not that big a deal. And for the end result that you're getting, I would just do it. So that's just one little piece of advice I would throw in there. So that's pretty much the floor. I did cut my lines in after. I don't really like using a liner to cut the lines in, just because I knew it was going to be a shop floor. I knew I was going to be rolling welding machines around it, and I knew I was going to be using a creeper, crawling under vehicles, so I didn't want those deep lines that a liner cuts when you're finishing concrete. So I cut the lines. Once you have the concrete done, then you go through and you lay out your bolt patterns for all your columns. And you've got to make sure that everything is right on the money. The plans tell you what to do, so you just go through the plans, you lay the bolt holes out, and then with a hammer drill, you drill them. And I drilled and epoxied my bolts. So I went with 16, 18-inch studs, and I went ahead and, let me see if I've got one here you can see. You can't really see the existing studs in the ground because they're covered up by plywood, but you can see how wide those are. Those are 12-inch beams, and I did drill and epoxy all my bolts. So moving on, I got the structure all set up. Once I started setting beams and building the structure, I was able to use a man lift, and I also was able to get a reach fork from the guy I worked for. So having some connections is definitely a plus as well. Once you get the main structure up, really all that's left to do is tin and insulation. And it's not rocket science, but it's nice if you have a couple people who have done it before. And another little piece of advice I can give you is, when you start, you need to make 100% sure that your tin is perfectly level, because if you're off just 1/8 of an inch, by the time you get to the end of the wall, you're going to be off inches. So you always want to make sure that you're pretty particular about how plumb it is. So once I got the building all put up, obviously then it was time to put doors in and lights and things like that. So the next thing I want to talk about is, we'll talk power. Don't look too long at this, because obviously there's a lot of these missing, because I've had to move things around. There was a lot that I didn't understand when I first put it in that I do now. So when you put the breakers in your panel, for those of you guys who don't know this, when you put breakers in your panel, you want to make sure to balance things out, because you've got 2 legs of power coming in. You want to make sure that you balance out the draw on both of those legs. You don't want to put all your breakers in one side and then hardly anything in the other. And that's why this looks the way it does, is because I didn't realize that at first. And then when I read up on it, I thought, you know what, I better move some of those around. And so I did. And so I'll eventually end up filling these holes in, but that's why it looks like crap right now. But this is another lesson that you guys can learn from my mistakes. So I did put in a 200 amp service, because I knew I was going to be welding and using a lot of power. So 200 amp service. And where I'm at here in Utah, what I did was I had to bring power in from the transformer out on the street. And so I dug the trench across my yard to the front of my house where the transformer is. I put the piping in, and I'll show you pictures of this. I went and rented a skid steer and a trencher, and I did the whole thing myself. I was saving money wherever I could. So I bought the conduit, I put the conduit in. I can give you guys a look at how that works out here. Okay, so here's where the power comes into my shop. And those 2 small pieces of conduit there, those are for your ground, because there's requirements, and that may vary on where you're at, on what type of ground requirements you have to have. But I've got 2 ground rods in. I got one at this end and one down at that end. So I've got 2 ground rods in, and they tie back into the panel here. And I ended up trenching across the lawn here and up towards the front yard. So the reason that I have a meter on my shop is I knew that I wanted to use this as a business. So for me, it made more sense to put a meter in versus tying into my existing meter on my house. So I put a separate service in on my property. I do believe if you put a second service in, the rate of which you pay for power is going to be a little bit more, but it's not crazy. It's just a little bit more. And I knew where I was going to be using this for a business. That was probably the better route for me, because then I could keep track of what power I was using for my business versus my home. And you guys can see that this shop is just behind my house. We live on a ½ acre, so I don't have a ton of property. I made it work the best I could, and I'll show you guys some footage of how I laid the shop out and where it is in relation to my property, which there's another reason that I laid it out that way. I did what I had to. So that's basically the power. So the power coming in, 200 amp service. I put a separate service in because I'm a business and I want to be able to keep track and write off the power for my business. So that was just a better option for me. If all you're doing is hobby stuff and you're just wanting to put power in your shop so you can run a welder or a plasma cutter or whatever, you may have enough room or enough power in your existing service on your house that all you'll have to do is run conduit from there to your shop, and then you'll be good. But obviously, if you don't know what you're doing, you need to get a professional's help. And that goes with everything I'm talking about here. If you're not comfortable doing it, get help from a professional. Back to the power. Once I brought the service in, I was able to start wiring up lights and outlets and all that stuff. So what I've done in my shop is I have 2 separate banks of lights. I don't know how much detail you guys want. I'm just sharing the details with you guys like I wanted to know. So there's a lot of details that I'm going to go over that a lot of you don't really care to hear. But if you're somebody who's looking to build a shop or is just curious about how I did it, I'm going to share these details with you. Sometimes the finer details make a big difference. So when I put my lights in, I knew I wanted 2 switches because I wanted half the shop to light up on one circuit and half on the other. And so that's what I've got here. I got 2 switches. You can see I turn the first one off, that half of the shop goes dark, and then that one. I picked them up at Home Depot. They're not a super expensive light. They're actually, I believe they're actually just regular light fixtures with the LED T8 bulbs in them. And they have been fantastic. They're bright, they do a good job. I haven't had any burnout yet, knock on wood. I did all the wiring myself. I picked up all my materials from Home Depot. The conduit, the boxes, the wire, everything. Price-wise, with lights and outlets, cost me about $45,000 to $5,000 is about what it cost me. Concrete at the time, now granted this was before everything was extremely inflated here in the US, and so my concrete ended up costing me about $9,000. My kit at the time, and I know these are about double now, but at the time my building cost was $23,500. I did pay a little bit extra to get a window, and the insulation, which doesn't come with your kit. Your kit is just the tin and the structure and the trim and all that stuff. So insulation doesn't typically come with steel buildings. So with mine, I believe my insulation cost me about another $6,000. And again, I upgraded that as well because I knew I was going to be working out here all winter. Okay, so now let's talk outlets. I'm somebody that believes that you're always better off putting in more outlets and having more than you need than not putting in enough and wishing you had more. And that goes with everything, really. So I put 4 outlets every 8 feet throughout my whole shop. And you can see, obviously, these ones don't get used a whole lot because they're behind the metal rack, but I was able to make it work to where none of them are blocked, so I can still use them if I need to. But it's really nice when you're working on stuff and you want to have an outlet close by. And so every 8 feet, I put in outlets. And I haven't regretted it. They're 20 amp outlets, and so you can see in a lot of key locations it's nice to have your regular outlets. You know, obviously where I've got countertops and stuff here, I wanted to have some outlets there, so it worked out perfect with my cabinets there. All right, so that's outlets. So now let's talk welder outlets. So when I originally started wiring these in, I wanted to put 3 welding outlets in. And whenever I did something, when I was putting the shop together, and I'm a visual learner, I'm a visual type of guy, and so I would always draw out my shop, and then I would mark where the lights would go. And I would think, okay, I don't really like that. They're too close together. There's too many. There's too little. I need more. I need less. If you put it on paper and you look at how it looks, it just makes more sense to me because you're able to say, okay, yeah, that's going to be enough coverage or whatever. So whether it was lights, whether it was outlets or whatever, I would put it on paper. So with my welder outlets, I did the same thing. I put it on paper. So I knew I wanted one right here. This is right where most of my work gets done. I got my welding table here. I knew I was going to want a welder outlet right there, front and center. So I put that one in. Obviously that's a short run of conduit, drops right into the breaker box right there, no big deal. Okay, so the second one I put in was, I knew I wanted one out here because I knew the majority of my welding on equipment that I pull in was going to be done right here. So I did put one right here, and these are 100 amp circuits because the welders I use, some of those welders are old, they're transformer machines, and if you're running them at full blast, the draw on them is like 100 amps. So if that doesn't make sense to you, have the conversation with an electrician and they can explain to you what that means. I run just the regular, you know, it's like a washing machine outlet and plug. They're just easy. You don't have to go to like an electrical supplier to get some specialty outlet. I like that I can get it at Home Depot in case I smoke one, or in case one breaks, then I can just go pick one up and keep working. So I put my second outlet there, and then I put my third outlet here. But I hardly ever use it, to be honest, because most of the time if I'm pulling equipment in, I pull the equipment in that bay. I don't typically pull equipment in this bay to work on it, just because everything's centralized over there. And so I had this here and I didn't hardly ever use it. And my business started growing, and I started getting to the point to where I knew I was going to need 3-phase power for some of this equipment. So I started picking up equipment. I didn't have 3-phase power yet. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And there's lots of different options. I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen, there's static converters, there's rotary converters, there's transformers, or if you pay to have 3-phase brought in, that's big money. But if you're in an area where you can do that, that's also an option, and it is very convenient. But I didn't have that option because I'm in a residential area. So I knew I was going to have to go with some sort of a converter that converts it from single-phase 240 to 3-phase 240. So I took this outlet, which is a 100 amp circuit, and I ended up using it to wire in this. And this, if you guys have never seen these, they're awesome. This is an American rotary phase converter. And what it is it takes the power, and you've already got 2 legs of power because it's single phase 240. So there's 2 legs of power there. Well, to generate the third leg so that you can have 3-phase power, this box uses a series of capacitors and other electrical components to run this motor. And this motor is basically a generator, and it generates the third leg of power, and that's what allows me to run all the 3-phase equipment in my shop. So now the way I set it up is I've got the power, the leg being generated from the motor that comes back into here, and then I brought conduit out that goes into a breaker panel. And then this breaker panel is my 3-phase breaker panel. So I've got the bandsaw, the mill, the lathe, the iron worker, and then I've got one hoist on there as well, because I've got one 3-phase hoist. That hoist right there is 3-phase. So these are 20 amp 3-phase breakers, which are extremely spendy. Anything 3-phase costs more. But I wanted to set it up so that I had a separate 3-phase panel. It just makes it easier for me, cleaner. And so then from there, I'm able to branch out and run conduit to all of my 3-phase equipment. That way, if I need to work on some equipment or something, I can go ahead, turn the breaker off, and then I know the power's locked out for that piece of equipment, and I can safely work on it. So that's my 3-phase converter. I know a lot of you guys have had questions about how I run 3-phase equipment in my shop. That's what allows me to do it right there. And if you get on YouTube and check it out, there's all sorts of videos and stuff on that. So if you want to go that route, that's definitely an option. I believe for that converter, I paid close to $3,000 for it. So when you look at it from a cost perspective, to get 3-phase, that's pretty cost effective. Now there are other ways, you know, you can get VFDs for all your equipment, you can get static converters, and you'll have to buy one unit for each machine. So if you're running VFDs on a piece of machinery, you'll have to buy one VFD for each piece of machinery, and they're not extremely expensive, but the cost does add up the more pieces of machinery you have. So just keep that in mind. The next thing we can talk about is air. So here I've got an Ingersoll Rand T30 compressor. It's a 60 gallon, and it is single phase. I did run just another one of those regular washing machine type outlets, 3-prong. I did put my compressor on a piece of rubber. It keeps from vibrating, and I think it actually makes it a little quieter too. I'm eventually going to build a little shed in this back corner of my property. I'm going to insulate it, and I'm going to put, you know, lawn tools, lawn mowers, that kind of crap out there. And I'm eventually going to put the compressor and the motor for my phase converter out there so that when I turn them on, there's no noise. For now, I've got it in here and it works fine for what I've got to do right now. So coming out of my compressor, I've got a 3-foot whip hose. If you guys are putting in compressors, you definitely want to have one of these in. You don't want to hard pipe it because you need something that's got some room to wiggle and move. You don't want to hard pipe it. This is called an FLR. That stands for filter, lubricate, and regulate. So it's got a regulator, it's got a filter that it goes through, and then there's lube in here. So when I'm using air tools and stuff, it will lube them up. You don't want to use a lot of that kind of lube stuff if you're running a plasma cutter and stuff like that. You do want to run an air dryer, and I'm still in the process of getting one. If you run that sort of thing with your plasma cutter, you're going to go through consumables a lot quicker, and honestly, I'm dealing with it, but it still works. It just smokes the consumables a lot quicker. So this piping that I went with, this is something that I think is worth mentioning. So this piping is called Rapid Air piping. You can find it on Amazon. So you've got an aluminum pipe with a PEX inside and a PEX outside, so I can bend this and it will hold its shape. So I've come out, I went into the wall, I came out over here and I ran air across the shop, and I've actually got some legs coming out and they go over to a hose reel. There's another one over there. You can see that leg comes over. And then I actually have a leg on either end of the shop, one down there and one down here. And where they come down, these are pretty cool. So there's a drain here, so you can drain the moisture out of your lines, and then a quick connect. And they come with this fancy hardware and stuff so that you can mount them. And it's just a really clean setup. I really like the way that works. I put the 45 Street elbow on there so that I could just hurry and hook my air hose up there, and I'm rolling. So those are pretty cool. So that's my air setup. The next thing I want to do, now that we've talked about the shop and just kind of how I set the shop up and the main body of the shop, the electrical, the structure, the insulation, the power, that stuff, now that that's all out of the way, I'll just give you guys a tour of my shop, my equipment, my tooling, stuff like that. And I don't have a ton, but we're getting there. Speaking of that, there's going to be a video coming up. I was able to win some stuff off of one of these equipment auctions. There were some lessons learned on that. I'll talk about that in the video, but there's some new equipment coming for the shop, so I'm looking forward to picking it up in a couple days, and we'll do a video on it and we'll discuss the goods and the bads about that. So anyway, moving on. All right, we'll start right here. So I've got a rack here where I keep my bottles. I keep track of what's empty and what's full. Fire extinguisher, obviously. You gotta have a picture of the Duke in the shop. Okay, so the next thing is this pallet racking. A lot of stuff like this, if you keep your ears open, you're gonna be able to pick up stuff like this that is gonna work for your situation if you're willing to put a little bit of work in. Now when I picked this up, it was kind of an ugly, I think it was orange and turquoise or something. I took these supports and I painted them silver. I left the blue because I like blue. I had a friend who heard that this company was going out of business. He mentioned it to me. I was able to bring a trailer in, load them up, and I actually got these shelves for free, and I love them. So they're a lot like pallet racking, but they're smaller. So I believe they're 24 inches deep. They're about 12 feet tall, and I can store all kinds of stuff on them. And I'm still in the process of trying to organize a lot of this stuff, you know. I've had some stuff going on in the shop, so I'm still trying to get this set up. But I do have power tools, chargers. I do have some random hardware, bolts, conduit fittings, piping. I kind of like some of these parts bins that I can just keep random stuff in. And then I've got hardware. I like to have a spot where I can stack random hardware. Right now I've got a bunch of welding rod, wire. I've got my drive rollers here, and then just random supplies and stuff, equipment for welding. It's nice to have some shelving like that. It doesn't take up a whole lot of room, but I can utilize a lot of room up high that you don't typically utilize. Okay, so I've got that. I built these little hangers for my extension cords. I do like just coiling up my cords on the wall. It's just the way I've always been taught, and I just like that system. It works good for me. So I've got random places throughout the shop where I just have a cord on a hanger, plug it in. It works good for me. I can drag it out, I roll it up, it gets it out of the way, but it's always there if I need it. I've got a Portacool here. It's pretty nice. It's a little undersized for my size of shop, but I like that it doesn't take up as much room. Some of those stinking Portacools are taller than me, just huge, and they do a good job, but they just take up a lot of room. So I like that this one doesn't take up a huge footprint. You guys have seen my pipe threader, handy tool right there. Okay, so this is one of those things that a lot of people have asked questions about. A lot of people have asked where I got my jib cranes, and a lot of people want to see videos on the jib cranes. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about the jib cranes now, but I think there's so much involved in the jib cranes that I'm going to have to do a separate video just on that. So I'll talk a little bit about these. These are W12 beams. They are 16 pounds per foot. 150-foot beam will build the column and the jib. The jib piece is 20 feet long from where the hinges are to where the end of the jib is. So they got a 20-foot reach. Obviously, I fabricated these up with stiffeners where the hinges are. You want to put stiffeners everywhere where there's going to be a lot of stress. I had to tie the column in with the existing column to be able to support the weight that I wanted to lift. It is welded directly to the top beam up top there. Everything's triple passed. I actually stick welded those. The hinges have been plasma cut. They are 1-inch plate, and obviously it takes 8 of them to make up a hinge set. The pins I machined myself. The hinges are kind of cool because you can see that grease zerk in the bottom. So I'm able to grease both the bottom and the top, and it shoots grease out right in the pivot point on the hinges. So that's kind of cool. They are extremely tight tolerances because I didn't want any slop in them. The jib actually clears that beam on that back corner by about 1/2 inch. If you look at where the hinges are, there's a couple ways I could have done this, but that top hinge I could have put higher and it probably would have been a little more rigid. You can see how close the bottom hinge set is to the bottom of the jib. If I would have put it a little bit further up, it probably would have been a little bit stronger, but I wanted to be able to drop the pin in from the top. The top of the pin has a big washer welded to it, and so I can just drop the pin in when I hang the jib. And you could have done something different where you slide the pin up and then run a pin through the top of it or whatever, but that's the system I decided on, and it's been just fine for me. The jib cranes are rated for 1 ton, so I'm always careful about what I lift with them. You don't want to go too much, because then you're going to bend something, break something, hurt somebody, all of the above. A couple other things we'll talk about, and I'll show you guys on this one. This was the first one I put up, and then I decided I wanted another one over here. They will meet in the middle. If I swing them both to the middle, they'll meet up. So I can basically transfer something from that corner of the shop to this corner of the shop. And for everything else, I got the forklift. But when I set the jib crane up, obviously I build the structure and set it. And then you can see there's an angle piece welded there with an eye bolt on it and some cable. And it runs to this end because I like my hoists to drive. I feel like they're safer. The ones that idle, if you're tipping something, if you're rolling something over and it's really heavy, most of the time it'll just take off, and I've seen people about get hurt. And so I just feel like these ones are a lot safer. I was able to find the hoists on a secondhand website that we use here, a lot like Facebook Marketplace or whatever. Again, if you're able to do some work on some stuff and figure things out, you can get some really good deals. I believe I bought that hoist for 150 bucks. Brand new, they're like 7,500 bucks. So I had to buy a piece of cable and a pendant, which I got off both of those off Amazon. And then I just did my research online on how to wire it in, figured it out, wired it up, and I had a hoist. So this one is single phase, but you can see the way it works. You coil up your wire, and then you have those rings that the rings will travel down the cable as the hoist goes in and out. And as you go in, obviously the coils stack up. And then when you go out, vice versa. So those are the jib cranes. When I bought the first beam, it was before the big inflation thing hit. And I was able to get that 50-foot piece of beam for about $680. So I bought that piece of beam, and I actually built this one at a different shop, hauled it over here, and I just used come-alongs and chain falls, rigged them up around the truss line, was able to stand them up, and went ahead and welded the column to the existing truss line. I used chain falls rigged up to that truss line to hang the jib and drop the pins in, and that's how I got it up there. I didn't use any equipment to do it. So I got the first one done. That was about 680 bucks for the steel. And you know, a lot of the reason I've been able to do cool stuff like this is because at the time I was working for a guy, and he's one of the people in my life that has helped me get to where I am today, and I'm just extremely grateful for that. I feel like everybody has somebody like that when they are trying to excel in life, and he is definitely one of the people that has helped me tremendously to get to where I am today, and I'm extremely grateful for him. So anyway, moving on. This beam, by the time I got to where I was ready to build this one, it was at least double. I want to say it was over $1,200 for this piece of beam. So I have no clue what it would be now. I guarantee it's outrageous, but that's kind of where we're at. The stiffeners is obviously 3/8 plate. I'll go over more of this when I do the video. that's the basic stuff for the jib crane and the process that I went through to build those. I did drill and epoxy these holes. You got to remember, this footing is huge underneath this. It's got a whole bunch of rebar tied in, so if you're gonna put something like this in, you definitely have to prepare the structure underneath. So that's the jib cranes. So moving on, now we got our bolt bins. Now I knew I wanted some bolt bins. I'm still trying to get this set up the way I want it, 100%. Maybe you guys have seen in some of the older videos, I only had two. I had a stainless rack and a grade 8 rack. I wanted to be able to get some zinc hardware in here. I wanted some metric hardware, and I wanted just some standard zinc hardware. So I ended up ordering two more, cutting the base apart and re-welding it, and then attach that to the wall. And so now this is the rack that I've ended up with. These are attached to the wall, but I've got stainless standard hardware, grade 8 standard hardware, zinc standard hardware, and metric zinc hardware. And eventually I may end up getting some stainless metric hardware. So that's kind of where we're at. I like to keep my bandsaw blades, abrasive belts for my belt sander. I build a little rack for my shovel and brooms and stuff like that, sledgehammer. Okay, the next thing here is this Dake arbor press. So I bought this secondhand and fixed it up. Threw some paint on it. I actually built this handle for it. That was before I was doing the YouTube thing, but there is some Instagram stuff on there about that. So I built that handle for it. I fixed up this base plate here. So that's my arbor press. Pretty sweet setup. I want to say I paid $300 or $400 for this, which is an extremely good deal. It's got the base on it, so I'm able to keep little parts and pieces that I use to press with, so that comes in handy. So this is my bandsaw here. It does not have a pivot base. I eventually would like to get one that does do miter cuts, but this one is just stationary, but it does do a really good job. It is I looked and looked for the brand on this for a long time, and I couldn't figure out what the brand was. Come to find out, I believe this is a saw from KBC Tools. So I think it's something that they just manufacture, but it's done a good job. I haven't had a lick of problems with it. I did build the base for it. I like to get the saw up off the floor. I don't like it when they're super low. I don't like bending over all the time. So the saw's been great. It is 3-phase. It does not have hydraulic assist on the up and down, so you've got to lift it up and then you open the valve, and it's a manual hydraulic valve that runs it. That's the saw. I did pick up this roller table for free, actually. It was sitting out in a friend's metal yard, and I asked him if I could have it, and he gave it to me, so I got lucky there. I did build some legs for it to get it the same height as the table on the bandsaw. That's worked out pretty good. I think I'm going to modify the bottom here to have another shelf, utilize these and have another shelf to put all this stuff on the floor in there, but that's worked out really good. The metal rack, there's also a small video I think on Instagram about me and the boys built the metal rack. We moved it over here. It's bolted to the wall. There's purlin in the wall and it's bolted to that. I built it out of 3x3 tube for the main frame pieces, and then obviously this is 3-inch channel with a little kicker support here, and it's been great. It's nice to be able to have somewhere up against the wall like this, utilize some space and not have everything be in the way. So we already talked about our compressor here, phase converter. I've showed you guys this in some of my other videos. Got the iron worker here. I did build a shelf for all my tooling for the iron worker here. I've got a Edwards pipe bender here. I still need to get dies for that. Super nice machine, it's brand new. I did pick up a Miller Trailblazer 325, and there's going to be a video coming up soon, I hope, on that as well, where we're going to build a welding trailer and we're going to get it all set up. So I've been trying to do this for the last 6-8 months. You know, running a business is hard, having money for all the things you need to have, and still paying for a family for the things that your family needs and stuff like that. So I'm just waiting for the right time when I can buy all the material and the axle and all that stuff that I'm gonna need to build a nice trailer that's gonna support the weight of a welding trailer. And I've got some other stuff. I've had these reels for a couple months. So those are lead reels. So I've got some stuff ready. I just need to build the trailer and get it set up the way I want it to. So we're gonna throw that welder on that trailer. Okay, then we've got our lathe here. It's a Clark lathe, 1440. And it's this lathe's a little on the cheaper side, but it really does a good job. It's been really good for me. It hasn't given me a lot of issues. I did have one of these bolts strip out that I had to rebuild, but other than that, it's been a great machine, and it allows me to do quite a bit of stuff that I didn't think I would be doing. So it's always nice to have machine tools. This tool box here, this is strictly machining tools. And so I've got my full set of S&D drill bits here, R8 end mill holders, all the tooling for the milling machine, and then obviously I've got tools for instrumentation tools here. Here's a lot of my lathe tooling. I've got some random screwdrivers, torque wrench, more drill bits, annular cutters, hole hogs, more machine tools, and mills, stuff for the milling machine. Still trying to get a good collection of that stuff. More machine tools, parallels, 1, 2, 3 blocks, drill and tap set, more taps, lathe machine tools. So next up, and we got our Burr King belt grinder. Ever since I watched Jimbo's Garage, I always wanted one of these. He's on YouTube and he uses one of these all the time, and I just always thought that that was a slick machine. This head you can tilt horizontal or vertical. This is the single phase 240 machine. With this setup, it's got plenty of power. That's one of the very few pieces of equipment that I have that I bought brand new, so that's kind of cool. Next up, the milling machine. This is a Sharp milling machine. I did pick this up used. A gunsmith had it before I did, and he, you know, one thing about it being a gunsmith, he only used about 8 to 12 inches of the travel on this, so it really hadn't been used to its full potential as far as travel and what it's capable of. So that was good for me, because I use it for a lot more machining, heavy machining stuff than a gunsmith would, where they're doing real precise drilling and tapping and, you know, small milling jobs. So that's been a great find for me. I did have to fix up a few things on it. It is a 3-phase machine, obviously. I built this cover for that so that I don't get zapped. When I picked it up, the guy had it wired up wrong, and I hooked it up and smoke started rolling out of the motor. So I couldn't figure out why it wasn't working right, because it would still spin, but there was smoke rolling out of it. So I just assumed that I smoked the motor. Well, I got the motor rebuilt, which cost me $600 to $800. I put it back on, hooked everything back up, started it again, and the motor was getting hot again. So then I went back to the drawing board and I started checking all the wiring from the way he had it wired up, and he didn't have the jumpers on the pecker head in the motor, and so that was the problem. So I ended up rigging up some jumper wires inside there, and it runs like a dream now. It's a very smooth machine. It's got a 12 by 48 table on it, and it does a great job. I love that machine. Come over here, we got rigging equipment. I like everything to be as organized as possible. So I built these racks. Obviously I've got clevises here, different sizes clevises for rigging. I've got some of these ratcheting chain come-alongs. I'm a huge fan of coughing. I think coughing makes a great hoist. Any type of come along, hoist, chain fall, whatever it is they make, they're like best of the best. They make awesome equipment. Just throwing that out there. Just a splitter chain here, a 4-way splitter chain here, just some random chokers. I use a lot of these synthetic chokers, different lengths, rated for different weights. So that's my rigging equipment, and that's about to get a lot bigger. Check out the videos coming up. In this cabinet here, I've got a lot of, I keep my welding hood in there. I got a lot of my construction equipment, saws, nail guns, stuff like that I have nowhere else to put. So I just put it in here, but just random stuff like that here. This one here, I keep all my spray lubes, brake cleaner, anti-seize, anything like that, funnels, paint. Keep all my paint stuff in this one, or at least some of it. Spray paint, I like to keep some of that stuff on hand. Earplugs, cutting lube, bee killer, just random stuff in that one. And more random stuff in this one, more cleaners and stuff like that to try to keep this place clean in that one. You guys have seen that one. It's just basically the stereo and some other tools and stuff. I do have a torch set up here. I run a Victor torch and Victor regulators. I'm a huge fan of Victor stuff. Hypertherm PowerMax 85. That's been a great machine. You see me use that a lot in the videos. I do have a Millermatic 255 here. That's one of the newer machines with the screen on it. Love that machine. I typically just use that for short arc. This machine here, you guys have seen me use this one a lot too. This is the XMT 350. I do have a liquid torch and liquid cooler there, an S22A wire feeder. So I run TIG and dual shield typically on that one. I run a Syncrowave 250 for my aluminum projects. So all the TIG aluminum you see me doing on the channel, this is the machine I use for that. I do have a Shopmaster 300 here, and it does run. That was actually given to me. Guy had it, never used it, didn't even know if it worked. It was sitting in his barn, and I was able to take it, tore the whole thing apart. I had to blow it out because it had all sorts of mouse crap and other stuff in there. Cleaned everything up. Everything looked good inside. I repainted the outside and kind of cleaned it up, and it does runs good. So I'll be using that. Once I get my air arc set up, I'll be using this machine as the power source for air arcing. So I do have some leads for it. This is just a little shelf that I built a long time ago. Company I was working for was throwing this stainless steel pan away, and I thought, you know what, that'd make a great tabletop. So I flipped it over, built this frame out of 2x4s and plywood, and it's just always been a handy little workbench for me. I threw this old vise on it, and it comes in handy sometimes when I'm grinding. I got my little Swag Off-Road Porta-Band here, vertical bandsaw. That's a handy little tool. Built myself a little grinder rack that I hang all my grinders on. Another good idea if you guys are looking for somewhere to store your grinders and stuff. Filing cabinet, I keep a lot of my non-important stuff for the business in there. These toolboxes here, this is all my hand tools. I do take a lot of pride in my tools, and I like them to stay very organized. I did start buying a lot of this Icon stuff a little while ago. Welding is something that's very hard on tools. You know, you got welding spatter and grinding grit. You're always working in dirty, nasty areas usually, and it's hard to spend snap-on money on tools that you're going to use when you're welding. I love snap-on tools, and I have a few, but it's easier for me to go buy a tool that's still lifetime warranty and that's still a quality tool that's going to hold up and not pay the snap-on price. And so these Icon tools have held up awesome for me. And if you don't know, Icon Tools is a Harbor Freight brand, but they're actually like their top tier stuff. And so you do pay a little more for them than you would, you know, like Pittsburgh or whatever that brand is. But these come in nice packages. They all have nice trays like this, and I feel like they are a quality tool, and they've held up great for me, and they do have a lifetime warranty. A lot of the other stuff I buy is like Carlisle from Napa. So sockets, ratchets, I do like this type of socket setup because they all have what they are on them. And if one's missing, you immediately know it's missing, and usually you can go find it. Extensions, breaker bars. Electrical tools. Chisels, punches. And then I've got a lot of electrical connectors and stuff like that that I use for wiring. Specialty tools, timing gun, compression test kit. This one's more like fabrication type stuff. I've got a lot of impact sockets and die grinder stuff in here. Squares, levels. I got a torch drawer that I keep a lot of this stuff in. New torch tips. Try to keep a stock of those in. All my abrasives. Try to keep those all together. Tape measures. I always like to keep a drawer with some random drill bits in it. I've got kits with this stuff in it that are all complete sets. But if you have a drawer that just has random ones in it, if you are gonna drill a hole through something that you know it's probably gonna ruin the bit, it's nice to get one of these out and ruin it instead of your nice set. This is a lot of impact stuff, pencils, pry bars, hammers, any sort of scissor, snipping tools, clamps, sockets, impact sockets mainly, pipe wrenches, pneumatic tools. I keep a drawer with brass fittings in it. Seems like there's always a need for air tools, brass fittings, stuff like that. Tape, tubing bender, flaring tool, grease guns, and then soldering tools, heat gun, torch, soldering iron, stuff like that. So that's the toolboxes. So we've pretty much made it the whole way around the shop. One thing I should probably talk about is this welding table. I did build the welding table. This is the exact size of table that I have done a lot of welding on, that I learned on. I've spent endless hours working on a table like this. It's 1-inch plate. It's a 4x12 piece. The legs on it are 6x8 rectangular tube. There is a 2-inch square tube runner across the middle in the bottom that holds the legs together. I did stitch weld some angle on it just to keep the table as flat as possible. It would be nice if I could afford one of those tables with the holes in it, and you know, it's machined flat and all that stuff, but those are thousands of dollars. I did mount a Wilton Mechanic Pro vise on it. Wilton's done a good job for me, so I just opted for the Wilton. The other thing I could talk about is the forklift. This is a 5,000 pound capacity forklift. I did pick it up secondhand. I believe I paid $10,000 for it. It's in pretty dang good shape. They did repaint a lot of the frame, but the gauges and everything are in really good shape as well. But it's been a good machine. I haven't had any issues with it. It fires up, runs on propane. It's got all new hoses on it. The forks are brand new. Tires are in good shape. So that's been a key piece of equipment in the shop, just to help me be able to move things around and keep things moving out the door. So the mini fridge. No shop is complete without a fully stocked mini fridge. So, just wanted to throw that in there. Some other things that aren't necessarily crucial to having a shop, but they make it nice. And so, this is one of the things that I think is pretty cool. I tried all sorts of different stereos in my shop. I've got two of these old school, I think they're Sony speakers, just old theater style speakers. There's one down in that corner. They're big, you know, they're 3.5 feet tall. You can pick them up at a yard sale cheap. These ones I got given to me, they were my grandpa's. And so I had them hooked to the actual stereo for a while. This is the CD player, it still works. But the stereo receiver, it only lasted a couple months and it just couldn't hold up in this environment. You know, all the dust and the metal grit and stuff like that. Typically electronic stuff doesn't hold up good in this environment. So I wanted to come up with some sort of a stereo that I wasn't gonna have to babysit, that I wasn't gonna have to work on all the time. And one of the things I really enjoy while I'm working is listening to music. And so I wanted just a good, reliable stereo that sounded good. So after that one got smoked, I did all sorts of research and I started looking at all the options for a type of stereo that would hold up, and there just wasn't that many good options. And so for you guys that are looking for a good option, you may want to think about this. So what I've got is I've taken a car stereo and they run on DC power, obviously. So what I did is I took and fabbed up a little switch panel here, and I've got a cigarette lighter, I've got some USB ports there, I've got a monitor here, and then a power switch. And so this is the switch that turns the whole system on. But to be able to have 12 volt DC power to run this, I bought this converter right here that converts it from AC to DC. I bought it off Amazon, and that will run your stereo. So if all you're looking to do is be able to wire a car stereo up in your garage, you just need a simple little converter like that, and that will allow you to wire it up correctly to where you're using DC power to power this up. But I like good audio, so I wanted to put an amplifier in, so I knew I needed more power. So what I did is I got on Amazon and I bought one of these. It's a DC power converter, so it converts power from AC to DC, and it's a Power Max, and this model is the PM355LK. And obviously I've got my wires coming out here that go to my amplifier. I've got a Pioneer 500 watt amplifier, and I can't show you guys any music because of copyright stuff, but it sounds really good. It's got good bass. It's really clear. I'm able to use the car stereo to tune the sound, but it's worked out really well. And I'll just give you guys a look here. So I power it on there. It's got a DC voltage meter right there. So I turn this on and it'll automatically hook to my phone because it works just like in your car. And so I go ahead and turn that on. It does have a remote, so if I'm across the shop I can use the remote, or this one Bluetooths to my phone and I play all my music off my phone. I have not had any problem with reception with the Bluetooth, and I'm able to use my phone throughout the whole shop, even outside the shop. And I can switch the song if I want using my phone. I actually saw this on YouTube. I just thought it was pretty neat because these car stereos seem to hold up a lot better than if you buy like a home stereo system or home stereo receiver. These just hold up better. And obviously something like this is a sealed unit. So it's sealed and it keeps most of the dust out, and it just works better. And it sounds good. So anyway, if you guys are looking for a creative way, something more durable, come up with some sort of a nice stereo in your garage or in your shop, try that out. That's pretty much about it for the shop. I can't think of anything else to go over with you guys that you might have questions about. This has worked out great, and I'm very grateful for the setup that I do have. It's taken me 6-7 years to get to this point, so it's been a long road. I can honestly tell you that I did finance the forklift and I financed the portable welder, But other than that, I have always tried to pay cash for everything because I really don't want to go down that road, and I don't want to have to stress out about paying a bunch of bills if things slow down trying to run my own business. And so that's why I've gone the route I have. So that's gonna pretty much wrap up the shop tour. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope it answered the questions you guys had about what my setup is. If there's anything I missed or any other questions you have, just drop a comment below and I'll try to get that put on there. So I appreciate you guys watching. Like, subscribe, and share, and we'll see you on the next one.